Sometimes.
I'm just going to stick him out here.
Okay.
I'm just going to stick him right here, and then if he shows through. Okay, now am I missing anybody? Peggy, Ron, and Cody are all I have left.
Yep, I think you're probably good. You might have friends. If you want to move, you can. You can go anywhere you want. But
This is your quiz, Kristen.
right?
So we have
Well, good morning. I think we're ready to get started this morning. And this is a special council meeting, workshop. And with that, you know what, let's go ahead and open in prayer. Our other workshops we don't, but let's go ahead and do that. David, would you like to pray for us? Sure. Thank you. Let's stand and pray.
Lord God, we just give thanks for the day that we can gather together. We give thanks that we can continue to serve the citizens of Nampa. We pray, God, for wisdom, guidance, direction, so that we might lead in a fashion that will be honoring to you and honoring to the citizens. We give thanks for the many blessings that you've blessed Nampa with. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you so much. Roll call.
Rodriguez.
Here.
Jingula.
here.
Bills.
Here.
Reynolds. Hammerfield.
Here.
Griffin.
Here.
Okay. For Planning and Zoning, Garner. Miller.
Here.
Daffer. Turner.
Here.
Kehoe.
Here.
Morgan. Kirkman.
Here.
Selman. Van Alker Jr.
Go ahead. We have a quorum on both, correct? I believe we do.
Yes.
Yes. Okay, thank you. This morning with our, this workshop this morning, we have two items that we're going to be covering. The first item will take probably an hour and 15 minutes, and then we'll move into the next one. If we can do it shorter, that's even better. Item 1.1 is a discussion item, and this is to review the proposed amendments to Title 10, Chapter 23, Sign Code. This is prior to a future public hearing, and as we know as a council, and this is good for all of us, we've discussed sign code quite a little bit, and it'll be good to get your input. Good morning, Christy. Thank you.
Good morning, Mayor, Councilman, Commissioners. Thank you for getting up so early for us this morning. Hopefully you've had a chance to kind of review a little bit of your packet so you know what we're going to be talking about today. We are requesting just a few things, so hopefully we can get through this fairly quickly. I know that this topic brings on a lot of conversation. Everyone's got a different opinion about how they want our city to look. So today's workshop will include a decision about the subcommittee's proposed standards for freestanding signs within 600 feet of the freeway. We will be reviewing temporary sign code and the enforcement of that code, what kind of permits might be required, potentially a new labeling program so that our code enforcement officers don't necessarily have to come and ask us every single time if this sign's allowed or that sign's allowed. They'll just know exactly when and where. And then some discussion about the types of temporary signs that we have in the city. So just a little bit of background. We proposed some code changes in September of 2023, decided that it needed a little bit more discussion rather than being in a public hearing. We also indicated that there have been numerous variances for freestanding signs in height and size, and we're still reviewing variances in that respect. City Council workshop on February 15th, 2024. We discussed temporary signs minimally, but we mostly discussed the freeway signs, and we were directed to establish a subcommittee and hold a meeting at that time. So on March 28th, 2024, we got the subcommittee together and we discussed freestanding sign heights and locations and just general freestanding signs around the city. At that time, we had some personnel change, and that's why we haven't talked about it again for a year. So here we are back a year later. This is the code change that the subcommittee came up with. So freestanding pole or monument non-billboard signs, and you'll see under spacing and location, only if the sign is located within 600 feet from the center line of I-84, can be 60 feet from the grade of I-84, but not to exceed 80 feet from the grade of the subject property. The size requirements for the face of that sign have not changed. Those will stay the same. 1.5 square feet per linear foot of street frontage, or 200 square feet maximum, whichever is more restrictive. So that is the new code that was proposed by the subcommittee. Today, really all I'm asking from you is, do you agree with this? Do you not agree with this? I can show you pictures of things that kind of fall within this range of sign height if you need some examples to see what that looks like. But really, all I'm asking from you today is just thumbs up, thumbs down. Do you think that this is appropriate language?
Christie?
Yes,
So,
Councilman Bills.
having helped on this, just for the other members and discussion, when we met as a subcommittee, staff had put together profiles. The engineering group had assisted, I believe. So when you think about the freeway going through Nampa, it rises and falls constantly, and there's a differential in elevation often from the south to the north. And so depending on where that party is located, where that sign's at. So it's not an even plane in terms of everything looking the same. And so that was the reason for the discussion to be off the grade of where the site is. Because you could have one that is sitting down, and so they'd want to go 100 feet in order to get their sign up even with the party who's a quarter mile away. And so the discussion was, and I'm not seeing it directly in these blue, was taking like the center median of the freeway and that at that point of property, and that establishes the grade for where the sign is going up. So a little clarification there.
Thank you, Councilman Bills. That's great detail. We did talk with the engineering department. We worked on the elevations and the grade levels, and you're correct. They're pretty flat across. It does kind of crest in the middle, like you're saying, and so that would be the measurement that we would be taking it from.
From the center, between the two lane, or did I? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Kind of a weird question, but was there any consideration given to like placement of signs when, like we're on the golf course on the freeway? I mean, if you look out on the golf course, you're coming off that freeway. It's nice, you know, scenery and whatnot. Is there any consideration given to placing signs in those type of areas rather than like what this picture shows along more of the commercial? Just so that the signs don't kind of muck up the nice scenery and stuff. It was kind of a weird.
Commissioner Kirkman.
It's an aesthetic question.
You know, it's difficult to have different regulations for different pieces of property. We kind of have to,
Beauty is an eye of the beholder, is that what
Yeah. It's something to be considered. If we wanted to do overlay districts all over the city, we could have different regulations for different overlay districts, but that's a whole new conversation. Yes. This is the. Okay. What would you like me to cover?
Excuse me, when people are not at the mic, I can't hear what they're saying.
Oh,
So sorry, I forgot to turn my mic on.
thank you.
Thank you. So this is just really short, and it's been a year. And for those that didn't sit on the subcommittee, we don't have a frame of reference for what we're asking for right now. So I feel like we need
Okay.
a little bit more background. And David, thank you for providing what you did, but I feel like we've just come in and boom, what do you think? And without going back and saying, okay, this is where we were.
Okay.
So I think we need a little bit more to give you good input.
Thank you, Mayor. So in the past, we have allowed a 40-foot sign against the freeway. For years, from 1998 to current, we have brought variances before City Council for different businesses to go higher than that. So 80 feet, 70 feet, 75 feet, 65 feet, 85 feet. These are all variances that have been granted by you. What that kind of tells staff is that our code isn't hitting the mark. And so we shouldn't have to be varying code. We should be able to do that at a staff level and not be clogging up your agenda with those kinds of questions. And so that's why we've talked about this off and on over the years, and it just seems like, you know, that 60 to 80 foot mark is kind of in that area that they keep asking for within a certain distance from the freeway, because, you know, you can see it further away. You have to know when you need to be prepared to exit the freeway to get to whatever services that you want to get to. So that's why they've always asked for this. They've asked for variances for larger face type too, but we haven't really extended that because that doesn't happen quite as often as the height happens. So.
If I could say something, I think one of the things that brought us to this discussion a year ago was we had a sign variance request. We had a gentleman that did signs all over the nation. I think he was from the Salt Lake City area, and he did share. He said, your sign, do you remember that? You're more restrictive. And then on the square foot, we were more restrictive than most places. And really, it does have to do with visibility when you're on I-84 and people are trying to identify what is there and where to get off. And so I don't remember right now what he said it was. So let's see, do we have on that sign Salt Lake City? I've got American Fork.
I don't think he included Salt Lake City on this list.
Okay, but that's where this discussion, it came because of the variances, but because we were sitting there listening to someone say, and it may, you know, that we're really, it seemed like we were kind of out of the norm in a major city with a freeway going through.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So thank you for, we can look at this, but.
Yeah, so if we did a comparison, we kind of looked at meridians and said, oh, okay, they're doing 660 feet from either side of the freeway, but they're still only allowing up to 40 feet. So they're still pretty low. Our code currently matches them. Caldwell is 90. Boise isn't allowing any more of them. Utah is 50 feet. Colorado is 45 and 50 feet. So we did not look up Salt Lake City to see what that is, but
That's okay.
yeah, this is
good.
kind of in range with what our code says now.
The thing that Chrissy mentioned is just a reminder. It seemed that every sign application in the prior 2 or 3 years has come before planning and zoning and subsequently council because each sign seeks a variance from what has been. So it seemed like we're constantly repeating, and most of those, as I understood from the workshop, were being approved. So it was more, let's go to where the marketplace is asking and cease the number of variances and kind of hit that target. So I believe we considered that Meridian was up to 40 within 660, but we've already granted variances taken up to the 60 to 80 foot. And so to have a code remain less than that and constantly go through the variance didn't make sense. But following the centerline grade of the freeway did make sense, but yet not to exceed the 80. So it gives that caveat of space to work in.
So quick, the stinker on Franklin that was an 85-foot approval, I'm assuming that was an approval. It says, yeah, it is. So was that one that the grade was really, went down? Does anybody know?
Mayor, that one is quite a distance away from the freeway. It's right at the 600-foot mark, like just within it. That's kind of how we came up with that 600-foot distance. It's just far enough away and kind of off the exit that it isn't like these convenience stores that are right up against the edge of the freeway that you can see. It's kind of off and back up by Fargo on Franklin, and so they just wanted to be seen. I don't think it was a grade issue so much as it was just they wanted to be seen.
Mayor, I think too, if I remember correctly, with the Shiloh, because it was up on a hill, and so their sign was up higher, and so they were like, we just need to be up so that we're level with them, if I remember correctly, or somewhat level.
Because that is an overpass that goes up and over, so there would be some blocking, and depending on which direction you're traveling from.
Yeah. Do we need to put any sidebars for, I'm thinking about our exits, and they're pretty much commercial and or industrial. So you wouldn't want to get, is there anything we're missing if we were to go 600 feet off the freeway with a really big sign? The other thing is density of signs. So when we create a variance, is there anything we're missing that it entitles them to do that we go, oh, good grief, we didn't mean to do that? What would
Mayor,
that be?
We do have code language that says that certain size signs have to be spaced certain distances apart for
Okay.
that reason.
So it's
that
already
we
in
don't get
there.
a blanketing effect.
Okay.
So our code already takes care of some of that. As far as the buffer zone kind of around the freeway, you're right, it's all pretty much light industrial, community business, BC zoned. I don't know that we would be incorporating anything that would be, there absolutely isn't anything residential that would be, up against the freeway like that. So I think we're okay. I know we've looked at it in the past. I haven't looked at it recently, and I've slept a few times in the last year, so. I don't really remember what we found.
Okay. So,
Mayor,
yes.
may I just jump in here real
Please.
quick? Just wanted to remind the council and commission that these are for pole signs for the existing businesses on the property. So just going back to Commissioner Kirkman's comment, like our golf course goes right up to the freeway. So these aren't for off-premise signs where you would have other businesses putting their sign on our golf course or anything. It's only on the property that it's advertising for. That's what these are. They're not the off-premise signs that we've talked about in other situations.
Thank you for that clarification. I appreciate that. So based on what you're saying, we would not even allow a sign on golf course property because we own the property and we don't allow
That's
signs.
correct.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, and that, it was just, I was thinking of
Let's
like.
grab
the
a
bill-
micro-
oh, sorry.
yeah.
I was thinking of like the billboards and things like that,
Yeah.
not necessarily on the golf course property, but around it. I mean, there's that new hotel that's going up, where Channel 6 is, it's right there, and it used to be a hotel, maybe it's something different now. But anyways, signs going up in that, in that vicinity, so, yeah, it definitely wouldn't be on golf course property.
Thank you.
Mayor, Christy, does this also apply then, as we grow to the north and we hit the highway, we will probably have commercial that abuts up to residential. Will these height requirements be the same on that north side as well?
Councilman Jangila, we have the Highway 16 specific area plan that talks about signage.
Okay.
So anything going along
that's
Highway
right, okay.
16 will be regulated by that specific area plan, and so it will not fall into this category.
Okay.
This is strictly the I-84 east-west corridor, and that's it. Nothing going north and south, and then Highway 2026 does not fall within this either.
Okay, perfect, thank you.
Yes, I believe that the specific area plan is monument signs only.
Correct, yeah.
Yeah.
Which is very nice. I'm glad to hear that. Yeah, thank you. Okay, so you would like, I think what we're looking for today, this is not an action item, but we are looking for a nod at the council and then any input from planning and zoning. Are we moving down the right path? Because once we get to the public hearing, we really want to present what we would want to approve.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, if we want to have a lengthy conversation about it, I just don't want to necessarily take up your time in a public hearing to do that. So this
Yes.
would be the time to have that conversation and say either yes or no. And then at some point this summer, we will be bringing these code changes back to you for actual approval and adoption.
So council, any comments, thoughts?
Mayor, I think I'll flip it back to Christy. Do you feel like this would help staff reach these goals without needing to come to us for to consider any changes, or do you feel like that this is adequate for you guys to do what you need to do?
Oh, thank you, Councilwoman Jangila. Yes, this was part of that conversation in that subcommittee, and I think that staff we have the elevations in our map that we can measure from. We will put some of that onus on the sign contractor to prove to us that that's what they've done. May require a little bit of a survey shot across the freeway, but they can do that. And that would help us a lot to just be able to issue the permits.
My last question, Mayor. I remember when we redid the Shell one, when they came back to us and it was kind of outdated and they were coming and changing the look of it. Does this have design with it at all? Do we need to include design, or is this just height specific?
Councilwoman Jangila, this is just height and location specific for these changes. We already have design requirements in our design review code and in our sign code for requiring like a pole cover, or any of the materials that they put on it needs to match their building and those kinds of things. We have that language in our code. If there's anything that you are seeing out there in the world that you don't like and you'd like us to enhance that, we can certainly talk about that.
Okay, thank you, Christy.
Mayor,
Yes.
on the design of the signs, have there been any variance requests on the design, or is that just pretty flat?
Commissioner Kirkman, we really haven't gotten much pushback on the design of the signs. Our sign code, or our design review code specifically says that it shall match whatever's been approved on the building. And so they've just kind of done it.
Need for no requests? Or
Yeah, we haven't really had anybody come and say, hey, we want to do this extravagantly different thing. Like let's take the Idaho Center Auto Mall, for instance. It doesn't really match a building because it kind of advertises an entire area. But, for the most part, they're incorporating our codes pretty well.
Yes.
Mayor, and I'll keep my comments brief. I will be a thumbs down, and I'll be a thumbs down in the hearing as well. The most recent variance that we requested, I voted no on for the same philosophy here. My opinion's different on the temporary side, so I'll be speaking out of both sides of my mouth on this issue. On the freeway, I think there is a trend that we're going digital in the sense of our phones are our billboards at this point. I don't want the skyline being littered and covered with with billboards. Boise got on that, Meridian has held, and I think most of these cities will end up phasing it out. I don't think Indian Creek Plaza is amazing because they allow 90-foot signage to go up into the sky. So I think there's just philosophical differences. I'm not trying to sway votes anyway. I just want there to be understanding why I voted no previously, why I'll be voting no in the future. I appreciate the good hard work on this. Sorry for the curveball, but
Thank you for your input,
I have
Councilman
a question.
Thank you. Councilman Haverfield? And then
Christie-
Councilman Bills.
Christie, does the Idaho Department of Transportation have any guidelines as far as on signage along the freeways?
Councilman Haverfield, they look at it as far as like vision clearance, vision triangles and those kinds of things, but they really let us deal with the sizes.
Throughout the state of Idaho?
As far as I know, I mean, I've only ever dealt with them within our jurisdiction, so.
And they don't have any guidelines as far as for internal road system or the network that they are responsible for as well?
We send everyone that is on those corridors to them to make sure that they're falling within their guidelines as well. They're
So they do have guidelines?
just for vision triangles and that kind of thing,
Okay.
but not for
Just for
size
placement
or
then.
height, yeah.
Thank
They
you.
let us regulate that.
Thank you. Councilman Bills?
So the, I guess clarification from Councilman Griffin is the billboard signs. It seems billboard signs aren't property owner signs. Those are advertising signs.
Correct, they're
That
off
comes under
premise.
a different review and a different part of the ordinance. This is property owner. These are signs for the property owner, the business that is established or going in. So there's a differential. I just wanted to make sure that we were clear that what we're discussing here is for a specific business that's located within the 600 feet of the freeway.
Correct. Thank you. Councilman Bills, yeah, I didn't really want to go down the billboard route today because that is a heavy lift.
you do not have to go down if you need to. I meant,
have a cap.
I understood what our purview was. When I say billboard, I think anything that's up advertising in the sky.
Anything
So
big, okay.
the lighthouse, truck stops, or the chevrons, or the sneaker stations, or any major corporation franchise. Frankly, mom and pop aren't throwing these up, so that's,
Okay,
I understand our purview, so we don't have to go down that route
okay. Thank you.
if you don't want to.
No,
You can
it's
if you
fine. It is
like.
just for your information. Our billboard code since 2003 has been capped at a certain number, and we don't allow any new billboards in the city. So they can be relocated. They can take one from here and put it over here, but they can't add new ones. So that isn't going to be an issue unless you guys decide to change that code. That's not going to be a problem. So, but I understand that, you know, even those freestanding signs do sometimes have digital components to them, and they are getting more and more common.
So Christy, just a suggestion, when we get ready for public hearing, I think it would be beneficial for the public, for all of us, but the public also, so they understand that there is design code, and this is where you find it. There are other codes. This is where you find it. Today, we're talking about this, and then also mention at the beginning of the public hearing that we are not discussing billboards, that we are at our cap on billboards, et cetera. So frame it there when we get ready, when we step into public hearing. That way, it just gets all that noise out of everybody's head, that yes, there are those other things, and then we can focus on what this decision is.
Okay.
That'll just,
That sounds great.
it's good, helpful information to have as we
Sounds
step
great.
in. So with that, is there any other feedback? Okay,
Move forward.
good job. Move forward to your next
Okay.
item today.
Thumbs up, yay.
Thank you.
Okay. So the next thing that we want to be talking about is temporary signs, and this is a big one. Maybe, maybe not. We've encouraged you all, to drive around, see what you think. Are you seeing things you like? Are you seeing things you don't like? Again, we haven't had any further discussion about temporary signs since that council workshop in February of last year. So what we're talking about for proposed revisions to our code is removing the definitions that are no longer used or referenced, clarify temporary sign types, clarify allowable signs and sizes, apply allowed durations and time limits, require permits for some temporary sign types, and implement a sign labeling program for permit required signs. And that label would look something like this. And we would have them attach it to the front of their sign so that our code enforcement can just look at it and say, oh, you have a permit, it expires on this date, now it needs to go away. Or, they at least know that they've contacted us and that they're in good standing, or they can call us and say, hey, the expiration date's kind of scratched off of here, what is it? They at least know that they've been in contact with us. So this might be a little more helpful for our enforcement team. So current temporary sign standards, we allow a maximum of 1 temporary sign displayed at a business at a time per business. They must be professionally made, be weatherproof, and in good repair. They cannot be illuminated. They must be self-supporting so as to remain upright. They must be on private property and cannot be within landscape strips maintained by the city. They cannot be attached to trees, shrubs, utility poles, or like items. Banners shall be adequately fastened and secured. They shall be spaced a minimum of 5 feet away from any other signs, except for fence banners that require a 10-foot spacing. And right now, they have no time duration specified, and most of them don't require permits. We kind of rely on our code enforcement officers to know their districts and be able to tell us, hey, this thing's been up here forever, but we really don't have a time frame that they're locked into. So what we're proposing to change, and this is really for clarification, Terry likes to use the term shotgun approach. If you've ever read our sign code, it's all over the place. And it is kind of a shotgun, and you have to pick through different places to find the information that you need for one type of sign. And so what we're going to try to do is kind of bring that all together and simplify it a little bit. And with that, instead of having, banners that allow 12, 18, 24, or 40 square feet, we're just going to bring that down to up to 40 square feet. And we're assuming that the market's probably going to drive what size of banner they determine that they're going to want. Obviously, if you have a tenant space that's only so wide, you're probably going to try to fit within that tenant space unless you're putting it out in your landscape strip. But anyway, these are the changes for this particular type of sign, and I'll show you the pictures of what we're talking about here. We're talking about lawn signs, construction signs, feather banners, and 2-post frame-mounted banners. And so these are some examples of what those are. So lawn signs, real estate signs, sprinkler blowout signs, those kinds of things would be considered lawn signs. Construction signs are typically temporary because they're for the term of the construction that's happening. Feather banners are pretty common. We've changed those from, I think the way it was defined in code, well, the way it's defined in code right now is a flag on a pole with no foundation. So we're going to call them feather banners going forward, just because that's easier for people to kind of visualize. And then, of course, we've got the 2-post and frame-mounted banners. People use all different kinds of materials for those kinds of things. They use PVC. They'll use the green fence posts to put their banners up. I was talking to Terry yesterday, and I said the issue that I kind of have about maybe if we were to require them being a frame-mounted banner is that almost becomes more permanent. And I don't know that that's the direction that we would want to go. So I don't know that we want to say you shall have a frame-mounted banner, because we kind of want them to move along. And I don't know where they would even store a frame if they weren't using it for something. Okay, so then on this page, we're talking about fence banners, wall banners, pole banners, flags on poles with permanent engineered foundations, flags on poles without foundations, and A-frames and chalkboards. So those signs look like this. So we've got a few fence banners in town. We do have wall banners. Every so often, someone will put a banner up while they're waiting for their wall sign to be created or installed. Pole banners, like you'd see downtown on the light fixtures. Flags on poles, of course. We really don't regulate the ones that are the American flag or the state flag or any of that. If you want to do that, you might need to get a building permit depending on how tall the pole is, but otherwise that's not really part of our sign code. Flags on poles without foundations goes back to kind of that feather flag idea again. And then A-frame signs and chalkboards and reader boards. I've noticed a decrease in those little reader board signs. I don't know if anyone else has, but I've noticed that those have kind of gone away a little bit, and I'm kind of excited about it, but they're allowed at a certain size and at certain locations. And on this one, we've got searchlights, hot air or helium balloons, and inflatables. So it's tax season. Everybody knows it's tax season. We've got a lot of inflatables out and about. So this is what that code would regulate, is when and where these would be allowed. And so if we look at that, it's one per business for a max of 90 days per calendar year. So during tax season, you can have an inflatable out. Do you have any questions about what you've seen? I'm happy to go into detail on any one of these.
Mayor?
Yes.
Christie, clarification on the 90 days. Is that 90 days continuous or 90 days broken up over multiple months?
Councilman Bills, that's really up to the business. We do have a permit for those kinds of signs where we have time frame regulations. They have to get a permit and they have to tell us what they're doing. And then if they're only doing a certain period of time and they want to do it 3 times a year, so they want to do 30 days, 30 days, 30 days, they can tell us that and then we'll just track it.
Okay. So having that sign permit and that tag will help?
That will help a great deal.
With the feather flags that are worn and faded and tethered from the wind?
So Councilman Bills, it's interesting, we were talking about this yesterday too. We do have code language in our code that talks about ripped, faded, in disrepair, that kind of stuff. Our code enforcement department can enforce that right now. They can take that paragraph out and they can say, hey, this sign needs to go away. Again, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. So, you know, our code enforcement is kind of walking a thin line there where they're like, well, we think your sign is falling apart, but maybe you don't. We really would like to see you freshen it up a little bit. They can do that. It's a tough line to walk.
Well, to a certain extent.
Yeah, if it's very obvious.
When the flags are
yeah.
tethered and when they're faded, it's time to be replaced.
Yes.
Otherwise, it just looks dirty, and especially coming out of winter when they've left it up all winter and got sand and wet and storm.
Yep.
I don't know that it does really that well for their business, candidly, but from an eyesore point of view, driving down the road, I think it's kind of says the city doesn't care about such matters. And I think as we want to continue to improve the economic development and continue to sharpen our game, I think that's one of the visuals that say yay or nay. It's kind of like if we'd left trash laying on the side of the road forever.
Yeah. Thank you, Councilman Bill. So yeah, direction to code enforcement to continue to watch for that kind of stuff, that would be great.
So I have a quick question. With this sign, the permission, right? Who is going to be issuing our temporary permit?
Terry, Mayor. Mayor, it'll be Terry. It will come out of planning and
So you
zoning.
guys, people will have to come in and ask for that. You guys have this current staffing to do it?
Yes. Yes, we do.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And then code enforcement then would be responsible, is that correct, to make sure that they have a temporary use? Going to monitor that?
That's correct, Mayor. Yeah, so that's kind of where we are now. You know, we allow certain things just outright. And so code enforcement isn't quite sure, okay, is that the kind of sign that is allowed outright? Or is that the kind that we need to be tracking? Or, you know, how does that work? And so as with our temporary use permits, we send them a monthly update of, these ones have expired, please go visit them and see if they're still there. We can do that with our signs now as well, because we'll have an end date and say, this sign has expired, would you please go check this out? And that will help us coordinate with them a whole lot better and not have them out there wondering, does this qualify as one that's just allowed, or does it need to go away?
Thank you, that's exactly what I was
Okay,
curious.
good. Yes, you're welcome.
Mayor, do you think that code enforcement has, like, that's feasible for them to go out and enforce that? Because the code is only as good as it is enforced.
Yeah, they have the ability now, and they have done it. One of the issues that we've run into is that with residential properties, you kind of know when someone's kind of stepping over the line, right? If they put a building or something too close to their fence, or, you know, and the neighbor will call up and say, hey, I have a question about our setbacks and that kind of thing. When you're driving down the street, just as an average citizen, you don't know what city code says about signs, right? Somebody puts a sign up, you think, oh, that must be allowed. And then you don't say anything. So our code enforcement works on a complaint-only basis. And if the citizens aren't complaining, they're not going to do anything about it. We're the ones that know the code. We're the ones that have to file the complaint. I take the same route to work every single day. There's a couple of them on there that I've said, hey, can you go visit these people? I don't drive the city all day, every day, so I don't see all of it. But it's up to us in this room that kind of know what the code is or where to find those details to call them and say, hey, this seems out of line. Can you go check it out? Because the average citizen isn't going to know to do that. So that's where it's kind of been a struggle for them, being that, you know, they typically will go out on a complaint rather than just initiating it themselves.
One thing I'd add to that is just that they do have times throughout the year where they do a blitz. They've done that for years, where they just say, okay, we're going to take this week and we're going to blitz the whole city's commercial areas and look at all the temporary signs. So they also do it that way, but it's just kind of a couple of times a year typically.
I would think it would be helpful with the sign labeling program, since you guys know when it's expired, you're going to be able to notify them versus now they have to go out and complain. It is complaint driven.
That's, yes.
And drive around and see it. So this would be beneficial. I have a question. Which type of temporary sign are you going to apply the sign labeling program to? So, for example, those lawn signs, when it's an election year,
Oh, yeah, that, it's not going to be those.
obviously-
Yeah. Thank you, Mayor, that's a great question. So like the feather banners, these things that they can pop up, right now they're allowed to have one feather banner per 50 feet of street frontage. And they have to be spaced out across the frontage. Those are allowed.
How long are they allowed? Just candidly, I've seen them.
They're-
It's like, it gets really ugly and messy.
Yeah.
There's certain areas of town that it's like, whoa, you just have stuff everywhere.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that I have said to code enforcement is, hey, I've noticed, you know, they have signs, they have the amount of signs that they need, but they're starting to get ratty and fall apart, and they go talk to them, and the one that I've noticed, it replaced them, and they got new signs. So it's just a matter of doing a knock and talk, and again, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. If the code enforcement officer doesn't think it's that bad, I'm not sure. I couldn't speak for them, but
Do we allow other banners in business for any length of time?
What if we just don't?
I'm seeing some head shaking, so you guys must feel like I do. Let's talk about that. Yeah.
I mean, if we know that that type of banner is more susceptible to becoming grungy, if you will, then why don't we just help code enforcement out and say, you can still have banners, just not that type.
I would like to throw in a few differing perspectives. I think this will have a significant impact on what we as Planning and Zoning and Council have approved time and time again, and that's neighborhoods. I think they're the biggest offenders of this. I see Corey Barton feather signs everywhere. Same with Hubble Homes. Same now with up in the northern part of town. What's that group? Not Lennar. I don't know who they are. I don't drive there very often, but I look at this permit requirement. We've heard the workloads of staff is already significant, so let's add on more. Doesn't make sense to me. I think this has a later impact of we need an additional FTE for this. I think a permitting process, we're trying to reform the amount of permits that we're putting out there. So having them go and put a permit on a feather banner or T2 post, fence banners. I'm fine with the flags on poles with permanent engineered foundation because obviously that's a forever lasting issue. So I understand why it's going to be there, but I think it's just another way to collect on a business owner or property owner. I think it creates a level of bureaucracy that we have to establish and create. I don't like that. I think this picks winners and losers. And from where I've driven in Nampa and seen, there's going to be a direct impact on a smaller population of developers, in my opinion, that we've approved their project, and now we're going to limit them on how they market that their properties are for sale. So, I'm saying we should keep growing as big as we can, but our actions will have consequences. They need to fill those spaces. Councilman Bills, I'd love to hear your perspective. If they're even necessary, I'd love to hear a perspective or an opinion, but I see a lot of red flying feather flags and banners saying open house, new development, CBH, Hubble. That's been my area of driving that I've seen.
So, in response, I think we need to differentiate and make sure our code differentiates new home, new business openings type of deal. It's been traditional across the country and in almost all markets that when a new, whether multifamily or single family housing opens, it will be flagged and et cetera. My experience is most, not all, but most marketing firms, real estate firms handling those projects, they change flags fairly regularly. They don't let them get old, dungy, et cetera, because it speaks to the product you're trying to encourage people to occupy or buy in. So that area of the community I've seen mostly self-policing. I think from a standpoint of code and those type of things, potentially we should have a paragraph within the residential subdivision ordinance on, because we deal with, the building department's dealing with a little bit the sales center, the house that's used as a marketing sales center. Some firms open up a cul-de-sac and they put 5 or 6 models in there and fence it. Everybody has different styles of what goes on. So to me, the banners and signage should come under that side of it versus the typical sign code. I don't see I don't see code enforcement needing to go out as much as from the development side and the building department side as far as the residential projects. There's no doubt a lot of poles get put up and they draw attention as far as those entries. But I'm seeing what's being discussed here is what's up and down the major corridors and in front of the businesses, and the ones that are torn, ratted, been there for a year or two, half leaning over. That type of deal, to me, doesn't speak well as far as the visual. So I would encourage, and at the same time, you have large developments we've approved. So you approve a 300 to 600 unit complex or subdivision. That doesn't build out in one phase. That's multiple phases, and pending the market situation, could be 2 to 3 years to get on through that. The key is that those banners, but they can become, what people don't understand from the signage, it's real estate or otherwise, if the sign is not fresh, it speaks to one issue about the business. If it's the same sign over and over and over, your eyes, your brain tunes it out. If you don't have fresh and change up, et cetera, it does no good for the business or the development that's got them up. It's been my experience and training.
Can I make or ask a question? Excuse me. Could I ask a question, and that is it possible to allow the flag signs, if you could go back to those, that picture?
These ones are the feather banners.
The feather banners, excuse me. Many times the feather banners are used for a grand opening, the open house, that sort of thing. Would it be possible that the feather banners are allowed for a one-day use? Or let's say if there's an open house on a weekend, you're going to have your feather banner out there both days that there's an open house. If there's a business that's having a grand opening that day or that week, but they are not allowed ongoing. Because that's where it gets really messy from a long-term feather banner as a permanent sign, because sometimes the feather banners that are temporary actually become kind of permanent, and that's what gets awkward. Yes.
Well, there's, other than just grand openings, there's many, many businesses around the town that use feather banners constantly.
For their regular
Yeah,
business
I mean,
every day.
right there at 12th and 7th, yeah, there's all kinds of feather banners all over the place. I think they're used a lot more other than grand opening or the 1 day, 2 day type of a thing. I appreciate Councilman Griffin's comment, and I kind of had the same thought about, is this government overreach type of a thing when we're really getting to the granular and the weeds of this thing? However, and my answer is yes, but sometimes we have to, government has to, when it gets to these areas of town where they have these dilapidated signs and these dilapidated, and then, yeah, government needs to step in and say, look, spruce it up. This is for the good of the community. So I agree with what you're saying. However, there is a but there, because I do think that government does need to come in at some point and help refurbish that. But one thing I was going to ask about the construction signs is it possible for that construction company or the developer or whatever to actually get the permit at the time where they come to planning and zoning, whatever that phase is, as far as and just getting it at that point?
Commissioner Kirkman, I don't know that we would necessarily need permits for construction signs, because they're going to go away when the construction is over.
Yeah, so these type of construction signs you're saying wouldn't need temporary?
They wouldn't need to have a sign. The lawn signs and the construction signs, they don't have that requirement for a sign permit, the way that like the banners and those kinds of things would, specifically for the reasons that you're talking about.
And I don't think that, again, and to Councilman Griffin's comment, I don't know that this would add additional workload to what's already being done by code enforcement. And if they're out and about already, I don't think that stopping and looking at a sign to see if there's a red or a green or whatever permit on it, it's going to be any additional burden or cost to the city at that point.
I have a question.
Yes.
Can you go back to the inflatable? Yeah. If we're just talking about personal opinions, which I believe that's what we're doing here, the thing that I find offensive somewhat is the active use of balloon signs where it's distraction. Instead of static signs that you can choose to read or not, especially the ones that have the air that go in and out of them on a periodic basis, so they bend down, stand up, that type of thing. If anything, I'd like to see a restriction on their use. personally. The big gorilla, the other larger signs are normally just temporary anyway, but those inflatable ones that have movement kind of bother me, just like a reader board sign that has LED aspects to it. They try to limit those because they are a distraction to a driver.
That's the whole point of the sign.
I would concur that those fan-type deals, typically they just look ratty. There's very few that constantly get changed up, et cetera, so.
Yes.
Mayor, I was just going to ask you a little more clarification on your feather banner signs. You were talking about 1 day or 2 days. Would you restrict new subdivisions from doing that, or would the real estate ones be taken out of that? Because like CBH, Hubble, and KB, and all the rest of our, we've got a number of national builders in town now, and they all want to, bring attention to their new developments, and they do it over time. And like Mr. Bill said, those subdivisions take 3, 4, 5 years, and they want to keep directing traffic to the new parts of the subdivision, and they do that with those banners and those feather flags. I'd hate to take those out because that is a big attractant for those developers that are doing that, where if you take those out, people are just driving down the road and they don't really understand, because they'll use them as they move into the subdivision, they'll use them to kind of direct traffic and stuff through there too. So I would caution taking that away from those developers that are doing those projects.
I think it's a really good point, and especially within their subdivision, right, what they're trying to do in directing people. But to Councilman Bill's point, and it's true, when a sign has been there for a very long time, people begin to ignore it. So if the feather banners, maybe it's limiting it on major corridors versus a subdivision that's a sales, because they are used very effectively, and it's very helpful, right, to find it, to see that banner. So maybe on the residential, we figure something out on a new subdivision, what that looks like. But what I'm thinking is, our major corridors within the city, when you have the feather banners that are there permanently as a sign, that's not really what the intended use of those are, and the effectiveness isn't necessarily even there. If those feather banners are out, when there is a grand opening, there's something special happening, it becomes very evident, and then they're actually more effective. But for a feather banner to be used as a standard signage, long-term, along our corridors, I don't know that that's the intended use of those feather banners. So I don't know, and the same with these little things. On a given occasion, if there's a grand opening or something and you're trying to highlight that, but for everyday signage, the feather banner to me was probably never intended to be just regular signage for a business.
Christy, how many calls a week do you get on this issue? The clerk or code enforcement, do we have those numbers?
Councilman Griffin, are you talking about complaints?
Yes.
Yeah, like I said, the citizens of Nampa don't know what the code says, so they don't typically file complaints about signs.
I challenge this thought process a little bit, because if I hit a pothole, I'm going to call the city and complain about it. If I don't like the way the lawn in front of the post office looks, I call the city and I complain about it. If there's vandalism, I call the city and I complain about it. If there's an issue, the citizens love to call when they can call. So I'd like to see those. I'm not closing my mind or the door on this issue.
Yeah,
I'd like that we're finding solutions to problems, not finding problems for solutions.
I don't have those numbers. I haven't really asked code enforcement if they get those kinds of calls. I don't think our office gets those kinds of calls from citizens.
We'll have to do the researching.
I notice it just because I am geared to notice it, but, and most of my staff now is driving around doing the same thing. It's really hard not to work on a Saturday when you're driving down the street going, that's not okay. But, so I want to kind of go back to 2012 is when our sign code was written. That's a few years ago. We went through about a 1.5-year process, and we called in sign companies, we called in businesses from around the city that we had been having issues with. And we got all these people together, and we had multiple open houses, we had multiple workshops, got all kinds of input, and the sign code that we have today is kind of that middle ground, and it really did eliminate a lot of problems. We still have some issues, obviously, but it did eliminate a lot of those problems, and it kind of brought the sign companies that are selling these and the businesses that want to be using them to a middle ground by saying, well, yeah, we're going to let you have one for every 50 feet of your street frontage. You can't have 10 clustered all together. And they were fine with that. If you start to take some of these opportunities away and say, this is not allowed at all, ever, maybe for a grand opening, maybe for this, maybe for that, the businesses they're going to push back on that. Just a warning, I don't have an opinion one way or the other. I'm just saying from experience, the businesses are going to push back on that if we start taking away their advertising opportunities.
Have they been notified on this process? I know we did it in 2012. Have we gone down that channel again this time?
No.
I encourage that we do.
Mayor?
Yes.
I think we have to be careful when we are talking about giving developers a right versus not the citizens. So if we say that developers can have them for their things, but these people can't for theirs, I think that we either do or we don't. We're not telling developers, I don't think it's an overreach because we're not telling people they can't advertise. We're just saying you need to do it in a more creative way. You need to change the way that you do it because this doesn't work anymore. And I don't think that that's necessarily an overreach. I mean, we choose to live in a community and we do have to uphold certain community standards in all areas in which we live. And so this is just one of those areas. So I don't feel so much as that being an overreach because they can still advertise. And then as far as, I think if developers want to have a Saturday open house, something or another, then they could, put them out for a day. But to have them there for a month or 2 months just to, show their new phase, I don't think that they need that. Personal opinion.
So.
Having brokered numerous deals and marketed, I have to respectfully disagree. And the key is that signage is kept fresh and it's changed up. That's no different from whether the development puts in, the quality landscaping or, presentation is everything as far as wanting to go in. And so I think we need to allow for it. The question is whether it comes under sign code or whether it's something that gets added to the subdivision side of things. And it's no different than the requirement now to have pour outs for concrete areas within the development and other trash issues and catch basins are bagged and, we could also move signage within new developments within the subdivision code. Then it places it on the development side as much as the marketing side. So as far as, I just think we have to keep that in perspective because visual and drive-by is one of the number one draws as far as residential. Secondly is, of course, your agents taking people there and the advertising that the communities do. But we all know of ones that, take care of stuff and don't take care of stuff or looks ratty or looks nice. That's a function of the marketplace. It's kind of like, do you bake a good pizza or a bad pizza? I hear comments about when people say, yeah, I own such and such's house. It was there for a year and we got out. It speaks to the quality of construction. So all that comes into a play. I think from a sign enforcement, it's when you drive down and you see ripped and torn flags on the poles in front of those subdivisions. There ought to be a phone call to say, remove your flags or or put new ones up. And that's the side of the equality of all businesses, because I hate driving the boulevard and seeing a smattering of stuff that is, been there a year or two, looks old, ratty. And those are the things that, from my side, if we're talking economic development and pride of authorship of our community, we would want things to be dressed up. We would want things to look better than, and not, oh yeah, it's just Canyon County, And so I think we have to stay sharp on how our presentation around the community is. I don't think we have to be dogmatic to the point that it's so difficult and onerous for those tenants and retailers and business people, but I think we have to be proud of the community and expect that things are done fairly well.
Thank you, David.
Yes.
Mayor Clean?
Yes.
Mayor Clean?
Yes.
Okay, so the signs is not a big issue with me. I think I agree with most of the council on our direction. But you talk about beautification of the city of Nampa, drive by the old Karcher Mall 208. That's a priority. Go by the old Kmart store, the Outlook store now. They look terrible. And that's a presentation to our community, is those two big stores or those two locations. So we got to do something with that first, more than worry about little bitty signs. That's my issue. Other than that, I agree with you all. I think we should just take a good look at these signs and try to get them more updated and better looking. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilwoman Jangula, and then I have a suggestion to move forward.
So to your point, yes, the developers are going to say the visibility on the road is going to be the most important, but mom and pop shop's going to say the same thing. So it's either we allow them or we don't. And is it worth having those types of signs to create more work for code enforcement to have to go around and replace them? Because yes, the developers are going to keep them nice and clean. They're probably changing them out every other week. Who knows? But the mom and pop shop might keep theirs there for 2 years, and it's ratty and it's gross. So we either have to go one way or the other on those. And then to Christy's point, if we put it in with development side, the public doesn't know the sign code, even though we know that that developer got, permission to have them there, but the person driving by down the street sees them and they're like, oh, well, they have them, so I'm going to put mine out, and then it just creates conflict. So I would prefer to just not have those type.
Thank you. For sake of time, because we need to wrap, I would like to make a suggestion, and that is, I'd like us to work with the Nampa Chamber of Commerce. Business is important to this community. Small businesses are important. The development is important. It's all important. But how we do it is also very important. And I think the one thing that we would all agree on is that we want to have a nice, clean community and that looks nice, because that's what's going to attract business. We need to raise the bar and the standard of what we offer in this community, and we want it. I shouldn't say raise the bar. We need to protect what we have in this community. It isn't necessarily raising the bar. It's protecting what we already have, which is amazing. And the signs help us do that. So I'd like to suggest that we work with the Nampa Chamber of Commerce, because they, as a business organization, they could actually put a think tank committee for us together, and we could visit with them about this and ask them what their thoughts are. I think it would be a good representation. And then when you come back, you can just share the outreach and what they've said on these. The temporary signs seem to be the big issue. So, and council, is there any, we'll come back and we'll address with the chamber and have them put together, we'll work with them in a subcommittee and talk about this. Is there anything really outstanding that you feel like we need to capture so that when they come back to us in public hearing, we've got it covered?
Mayor, I would just like to add, I appreciate adding the chamber. Christy, you and your staff have obviously been looking for these bad actors, you could say, with the deteriorated signs. Please invite them as well to that think tank. I think they'd offer a good perspective outside of chamber as well.
Okay. Sounds great.
Mayor?
Yes.
Excuse me, I just wanted to make sure that we have, excuse me, clear direction. So I just have a few bullet points that I think we've heard, and just want to reiterate that for your confirmation. So I heard that we should limit the types of temporary signs requiring a permit label. So we're going to take a look at that to make sure we're not overreaching and not requiring permit labels for too many signs. Maybe in a few cases that makes sense. The inflatables that move should no longer be permitted. Are we all on the same page there, or?
I think that was an opinion that wasn't as a whole, but it could be restricted to a grand opening, one-day use or something. So that wasn't a concrete thing, but it was a shared opinion.
Okay,
Yes.
so generally, do we, because we have to go back now and try to create code, right? So we don't want to go a direction that you're not comfortable with as a group.
I think this needs to go to the committee, through the chamber, to be discussed. So we'll discuss that, and then we'll come back with a recommendation after you.
Mayor, I
Yes.
think that one would be hairy because I know the PD has a big one that they put out sometimes for their events, so we couldn't have them have one and then say this other parts of the city can't have one, so that one might be one to keep looking at.
And it could be on an event basis, one day.
Civic signs are actually regulated differently. So things for civic departments and civic events have their own section of code.
Well, we need to compare these. So whatever areas are not represented in this, we've got to compare them all.
Yep.
So let's not just limit this to one thing and then allow it over here. We need to bring civic code in. We need to bring any other code that we're not aware of sitting here today into this discussion, because we need to be consistent. Yeah.
So the last, the comments about feather banner, I think we've kind of summarized the concerns there. I don't think we're all on the same page there, so we'll go to the Chamber of Commerce, involve them. And I think the direction is to come back to this group in the future. Is that correct? Before we draft code, or are we?
I think, because I don't want it to set another year, my thought, unless council feels differently, or planning and zoning, if you do what we're talking about doing and bring back the recommendation, we can have the discussion at a public hearing, but do it with the representation of this subcommittee, and I'll work with you on that and reach out to the chamber to ensure we have good representation. We'll have the developers at the table, our realtors at the table. We need to have small business at the table. You know what, the one thing that I believe is that everyone wants the best for this community when it comes to the people in the community, right? We all want the best. And so I think if we can get the different sectors represented and have a good discussion, we'll come out with a recommended outcome.
Okay, great. And then the last point was that we should enforce the code for removing signs that are torn, faded, and dirty. Just really emphasize that too.
If it's currently in code, is it in code?
It is
Okay, so
currently in
then
code.
no change there, and yes, they can go do their job.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Two more slides, just want to go over real quickly. We are planning to bring code changes to you. What we've talked about today is the actual standards that we're looking at changing. But our whole sign code is potentially going to look different. We want to simplify it. Right now, it's a fairly large chapter in our code. It has a lot of stuff in it that we feel like could maybe be moved into a appendix kind of book, like we have for design review. We have a guidebook. So we want to create a sign guidebook that has all the definitions and the pictures and the intent, the vision kind of the city in that guidebook. And then we have all of the sign types and the bulk standards actually in code. So we aren't going to change the language necessarily. We're just going to reorganize it so that it's easier for our sign companies to navigate through, not that shotgun approach that we've talked about.
And when you come back before us all in this public hearing, you're going to have that done.
Yes.
Thank you. So we can look at it as
Yes.
it's going to be perfect.
So Well, hopefully coming this summer, depending on when we can get this group together to meet with them. We are looking to have code changes for the freestanding signs within 600 feet of the freeway based on our conversation today, and code changes for temporary signs if whatever is determined to be necessary. Simplification of Title 10, Chapter 23, and the implementation of the sign guidebook. And that's what we hope to bring to you either by July or August. We'll see how fast we can make this happen.
Maybe August.
Maybe August.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. August, September, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you.
Sounds good. Thank you so much.
Great job. Thank you so much. Okay, so I don't know if anybody else needs a really fast break. If not, I'm going to take a quick break, but we are going to step into item 2. This is a discussion on House Bill 389 and the property tax. I'd like to ask those visiting, Rick and Steve, go ahead and come sit up at the table here with a microphone. Doug is going to come forward and get started. Doug, you can get started, and just feel free to get started. I'll be right back. You guys are going first? Okay. I'll step away for 2 seconds, and you guys go ahead and come.
Happy birthday, Doug.
Yes, happy birthday, Doug. And later this week, happy birthday. You've done it. Me. Introduce yourselves, name, title, everything, so since we are recorded. Thank you. And a quick note that planning and zoning, you are welcome to stay, but you don't have to stay. This is really interesting information, so you are welcome to stay through the entire thing, but don't have to.
All right, good morning. I think I know most of you. It's good to be here. Council, Mayor, Council, and Planning and Zoning Commissioners. Yeah, I think I know all the Planning and Zoning Commissioners. You're missing a few this morning, I think, but staff, it's good to see Nampa staff this morning. So we're here to talk about the effects of House Bill 389 mostly, but there's also some other legislative impacts. And this is where I kind of was visiting with the mayor last week because there was sort of a revelation that there was other compounding effects on that. But before we get to that, I want to introduce Steve Onifray. Steve Onifray is the newly appointed chief deputy in the treasurer's office at Canyon County. And the treasurer there is Jennifer Waters, who recently became treasurer within the last year. Steve previously was shared between the assessor, the clerk, and the treasurer, so kind of a unique role. He had 3 bosses who were 3 different elected people, and his salary was paid in slices of 3. And it was a good arrangement because for as long as it lasted with Steve, because he was unique, he has a unique skill set. But the new treasurer thought he'd be a great fit, and he is a great fit to be her chief deputy. However, he can still help on some projects, and if you know me, I like to nerd out over data, and Steve's really good at pulling data together. I think Doug Racine can attest to that as well, where when we try to look at implications of all the moving pieces on whether it's the assessment role to tax role to legislative changes, how does all of that combined affect the bottom line, which is the dollars and cents that you have to appropriate to provide services in the community. So that's a big deal. But I don't know if we should wait till the mayor comes back before we formally start. Yeah, we'll just, so just introductions. Maybe you can go around and introduce yourselves real quick for Steve's sake so he can know who you are.
Brett Miller, Planning and Zoning.
Jeff Kirkman, Planning and Zoning.
Sebastian Griffin, City Council.
Randy Haverfield, City Council.
Natalie Jingula, City Council.
Victor Rodriguez, City Council.
Victor Rodriguez online.
Oh, Victor's online.
Councilman Rodriguez, are you online?
Yes, sir. Hi, Rick.
All right. Good morning, good to see you. Hopefully you get on the golf course today.
And Dale Reynolds.
No.
It's too windy. And Councilman Reynolds, good morning to you. So,
Good morning.
So Mayor, we made introductions. If you're okay, we can go ahead and start. Is that good? So I'm going to give kind of a high-level view on how the legislative changes. I know we're on a schedule, and Doug has some good information to share, and then I want to turn it over to Steve to quantify some of the fiscal impacts, and then answer some questions, and then let Doug kind of explain more what are the implications for Nampa. But high-level legislative changes, the House Bill 389, which is how this was agendized, was a critical piece of legislation that was passed in 2021. I'm not going to summarize all of the pieces in the legislation. There's several main components that are important to note, and the motivation behind it, and it was carried by Speaker Moyle and then Senator Jim Rice, was to deal with property tax. They were hearing from constituents that property taxes were going up. At that time, I was here at the mayor's office as chief of staff and engaged in legislative engagement, and we were also working with Steve Onifray in his former capacity with the county to talk about how what was really driving the increase in, by the way, not everyone's property taxes were going up. Homeowners were going up because house values were exploding, if you recall, especially like during COVID and post-COVID. Commercial went up a little bit, but it stayed relatively flat, and it would be a deeper dive to explain how the levy rate works, but all that to say the total value of the community was going up, but that was mostly because home values were going up, which was driving down the levy rate. But for commercial properties or properties that weren't going up at the same rate, they were seeing actually a tax decrease on their bill, but homeowners were seeing a tax increase. And you had some entities like the city of Nampa, I believe in 2020, take 0% of the 3% allowed, and part of that was to participate in the governor's GPSI program, which allowed some money to offset law enforcement costs. The Canyon County didn't even take new construction or 3% that year, I believe, and people still saw their property taxes go up, and they were really frustrated. And so the thought was, the legislators thought, well, we need to keep those locals from increasing their budget. And part of what they accomplished in House Bill 389 was to not allow new construction. The idea is if a house got a certificate of occupancy today, they're living in their home, we've already done our budget, so this would come onto the occupancy roll. The assessed value of that home gets charged a prorated tax, and it's collected as occupancy collection for us. It takes some time. It won't go onto the budget. Even when you're planning for the budget for 2026, it's looking backwards at January 1st, all the homes that already exist on January 1st. So all the homes that have been onboarded this year aren't even part of the new construction formula when you're planning the budget for 26. It's not till FY27 that you're capturing the homes that, let's say, hypothetically get built today with the certificate of occupancy. So what you're collecting is occupancy from them, and then you take their value times the existing levy rate in the old school model, and that would come on as the new construction increment that you get to budget when it's time to budget the new construction. So what they did was you only get 90% of that, and if it's expiring urban renewal, you get 80% instead of 100%. If it's annexation, you get 90%, and then there's this hard 8% cap. I don't think that's as much a concern for a city of Nampa as it is for some smaller cities. So that was kind of high-level 389. It was let's change the new construction formula so you don't get as much of what that increment would be. So if I got a certificate of occupancy today, and let's say hypothetically my taxes were $1,000, eventually when that rolled into the new construction, you'd add $1,000 to your budget. That $1,000 increase to your property tax collection isn't an increase over everyone else. It's just reflecting what my contribution is. They're saying instead of taking $1,000, you take $900. Okay, that's kind of just a very quick overview of 389. But you still have to provide services for me. And so it's like letting, I say, more people to the potluck and tell them just to bring enough food for almost to feed yourself. And the more you have a dinner party grow where people are not paying their share, you don't feel it when just a few people show up. Everyone's still eating their fill and everyone's having a good time. But the more and more you grow where people are not contributing enough to even feed themselves, you're going to start to feel that pinch. We predicted that back in 2021. We said you're probably not going to feel it in year 1 or 2, but you're really going to start feeling it in year 5, and certainly by year 10, because there's going to be this compounding effect where you're providing services with 90 cents on the dollar. But it gets worse, and I think Steve can share a little bit more. There's a follow-up legislation the following year that said, when you change your land use from, let's say, ag to residential, there's a land use change component. Your land is worth more if it's zoned residential now and you're going to build a home on it than it was when it was ag, for example. That land value change for years and decades was also included in the new construction increment. So the new construction increment was the land value change plus the improvement. Those two increment increases were taxed, and that increment was added to the budget, okay? And so there's follow-up legislation that said that land value change does not longer go into the new value construction. I think most people, in fact, just that piece of legislation, which I think if you scroll to the right a little bit, that came into 2022. It was House Bill 673. Everybody voted for it, and no one debated really against it. Even the assessors, I think, were okay with it because they said it simplified how they did the new construction formula. It did not determine the market value of that land value change. That being said, when we looked at the implications more retrospectively recently, I was quite alarmed at what the fiscal impact is. And in Nampa's history, the fiscal impact of that piece of legislation is actually arguably more impactful than House Bill 389. Those are really the two pieces of legislation. There's a couple other ancillary pieces of legislation, like before you used to have to get your homeowner's exemption, you had to apply by April 15th, I believe, and they changed it to allow people to apply anytime. The problem is you might already set your levy and the values, and so now if someone applies really late for their homeowner's exemption, you don't readjust the levy in that year. It ends up being a tax cancellation on that portion of what would have otherwise been exempt after what used to be a prior deadline. So those are small contributing factors, and we're not going to focus on those small things, but there's several other components that are all contributing to this. But it's really House Bill 389 and the land use change. When you look back over Nampa's history, under the old formula, you see that 2021 and back, or 2022 and back, prior, that change of use is what the increased value was that was coming on to the new increment rule. So I used to be a council member with, I think Haverfield is the only remaining council member from the time when I was on city council. But I think we'll show we prided ourselves in trying to stay under that 3% in our budget, but we took the full new construction amount. That full new construction included millions and millions of dollars in that change of use that is no longer counted. So now you're losing the change of use, which looking back was an average of 22% of the value of the new construction formula, and then you're deducting another 10% off what's remaining. So there's a double deduction occurring. You're not including change of use, and then you're taking 10% off what's remaining. So it's like a double discount for those of you who like to coupon. It's like applying two coupons. But the problem is you're now left with 75 cents on the dollar, and that's conservative. And we projected over 23 and 24, not the 22% amount, more like a 15% amount to be really conservative, because it's not being tracked anymore. So we don't have the numbers on the change of value, which used to be part of the new increment. So that leaves you with maybe 70, 75 cents on the dollar. So think of it as someone showing up to the potluck, bringing 75% portion size for themselves, contribute it to a buffet style meal for everyone. Over time, the more you grow, you're going to be starved in trying to provide proportionate level of service based on 75 cents on the dollar. So I'll turn it over to Steve to kind of explain the mechanics of it, and then I think Doug's going to do a wrap. We'll have Q&A time as well. So yeah.
Thank you, Rick.
Rick, I have a question for you.
Oh. Councilman Rodriguez?
Yes, I have a question. So with the tax deductions that the legislators have given us this year, how is that going to affect the cities that have to have their services given?
Could I pause real quickly? Yeah. Victor, I'm going to have us answer that question because it's a little different question. I'd like to save that question to the end. I want to make sure we get through this topic, and then let's put that answer into the end so that we get through this presentation. So thank you for the question, Councilman Rodriguez, and we'll answer it when we get done. Thank you. And then I just want to, I'm not seeing the online presentation. Are you showing the screen? Are people watching online seeing these slides all the time?
It is now.
Yes, Mayor.
Oh, okay, it's important. Thank you so much. Okay, thank you. Go ahead.
Mayor. Good
And
morning.
thank you so much. Rick and Steve, thank you so much for being here and lending your expertise to this and sharing. We appreciate, too, that Doug is constantly working with you, Steve, getting numbers. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. Well, Rick stole some of my thunder regarding this presentation, but the difficult part is with all the changes that have happened recently in legislation has really impacted the budgets at both the county, the city, cemetery district, library districts. We have 61 taxing districts in Canyon County and 4 drain districts. So we're taxing 465 districts, which is the most in the state. 389, when 389 was passed, it was, I could see the impact growing at a nominal scale as we move through time, and I think year 3 to 5 is when districts were really going to feel the impact of it. Nobody was happy about it within the districts. Maybe the taxpayers were happy. They were saving tax dollars, but at what cost? And that cost is the services that are provided. What I started working on, and I'm sorry that this is not complete, it's very detailed, but is a model to show the implications of House Bill 389 and consequently the House Bill 653. So looking at that data over the last 10 years, and I have a little graph down there, the orange portion is your current budget. That's the city of Nampa's current budget and what they levy. And the way
Blue is blue, current budget.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yes, the blue is the current budget. And let me step back just a second just to figure out your budgets each year. You would take the last 3 years' highest property tax portion of your budget. You would add 3% and then add the new construction and annexation to come up with the max allowable taxes you could levy for the current year. So when you move forward in time with 389, you're only getting 90%, and now the new construction, the change of use is eliminated, and so you're going to see this separation of what was before and what you have the ability to take currently. And I know the City of Napa has always done a great job in not taking the full amount of property tax that was allowed to them. There was some changes within foregone. What used to happen is that money that wasn't taken was added to a foregone. It was just a number that we tracked, and then you could levy for it in future years. And I think, in my opinion, was brilliant. This got away from use it or lose it mentality, right? Well, now that you have to by resolution say that you're saving that money, and by resolution you're going to use that money. Really affects the foregone balance, right? So back to the model, sorry. So in this model, if you can scroll up just a little bit. Yeah, so I'm looking at 2014 through 2024. And the current budget, that's what the amount that the city of Nampa has levied over the course of 10 years. And that is the gray line, that is the blue line. You'll see just the small little sliver that comes up, which is the blue line at the end. That was the foregone, amount of foregone that was taken last year, right? The orange line is if you didn't take the foregone. And the gray line is the impact that legislation has. So had no changes to legislation at this point, using the same ratio of value, this is where the city of Nampa would be sitting on their ability to levy property taxes.
And Steve, could I say something real
Sure.
quickly? And that is that, just for the public, the foregone we took last year, the 3% falls off. So when they see the line go up, that's a one-year use.
Yes.
It falls off the next year because it's only a one-year use, so it isn't in the next year's taxes. The 1% that we took, that we've considered for the future to fund police officers, that stays. So it'd be interesting to see, without the 3% that falls off, what that is. So just a quick note.
And you'll see that next year, right? So as we're calculating the max available budget that's allowed through property taxes, that next year you're going to see that gray line separate a little bit further, and then that blue line come down closer to the orange line, right? And the orange line continue. So yes, you are correct. That 3% is one-time use. And going back to the foregone, I mean, the use it or lose it mentality, if you're using, many of the districts now, because of 389, are being forced to use their foregone just to keep up with the new construction growth, right? If you use the 3% for capital improvements, moving forward, that doesn't become part of your budget. Just the 1% becomes part of your budget that you're allowed to carry forward. So you wind up losing it as far as capacity to budget for property taxes.
And that was also part of 389. It changed some rules on foregone. Before, if you had $5 million foregone, you could, let's say you needed to hire a bunch of police in 1 year, you can grab that foregone and apply it, and now it's only 1% gets to be part of your ongoing base. And as Mayor pointed out, Steve, 3% is a one-time capital, but then it falls off your foregone. That's not a repeated tax, it's a one-time tax. Even though that represents what the city did not take, that would have been in the base ongoing. So those were some of the changing factors, and I think what his graph is showing, I wanted to point out that gray line. That gray line is where Nampa would sit if it kept the same behavior. So I told him to even reduce, that's not the full 3%. So that's consistent with what Nampa did the prior 4 to 5 years, which is take new construction under the way the formula worked and take 2.5%. So that represents 2.5%, not 3%, and you'll start to see this gap. So let's say the legislation never happened and Nampa just kept doing what they had always been doing. Nampa would have several million more in their tax base right now. So when you talk about the need for police officers or other needs within the city, that's where the city of Nampa would be today if legislation never happened. And so even with the use of foregone, as the mayor points out, which is a sliver up, it's still not even what Nampa would be at today if the legislation never came into effect, reducing change of use, reducing 10%, all of these compounding discounts on the new construction increment.
Doug, could you scroll down so we can see the bar at the top that shows the difference? Scroll up, I guess, is what I'm asking you to do, the opposite, and then scroll over so we can see it.
The dollar amount.
The dollar amount. So.
Well, that's what that recap down below was the difference.
Well, I was trying to see it. Maybe go back just a hair so that we don't have. I'd like to, slide it over so we can see from 2014, the last 10 years, where many of those years we did not take a full 3%. So that's what is interesting to see. Not even taking the full percent. The gap. Thank you. It was just good to see it from 2014. So thank you.
Could you explain to me the difference? I'm seeing a $5 million difference on this 2024 scale and only a $600,000 difference on the one below the graph. Can you explain to me the difference between the two numbers? This one, it says, I'm sure it's budgeted, no foregone legislative change. 2024, it says 45, 43, 50 on this portion. On the lower portion, I think it was 43, 44, 606 or something like that. I just don't hey, I got it.
Yeah.
620.
So if you can scroll all the way to the
And scroll back so we can see the other side of the screen now.
So,
That was compounding over the years. Is that what that's where I'm missing? Okay, so from 2014 to 2025, we've lost $5 million compounding over time from the base budget, correct?
Correct.
Is that how I was reading it? Thank you.
Yeah.
So this is just in the last 4 years. It was 3.3 million, but for our actual, last year, it was 620,000 that we had lost because of the legislative change.
correct.
Thank you.
Yeah, what's tricky is because that would have been in the base carried forward, right? And then, so it's showing each year.
Yeah.
And it's a little greater, it's a little greater than I estimated because of the land use portion that I was unaware of.
So it would be significantly more.
Yeah, but to keep in mind that that's 3 million, well, the 3.347, that's per year. We're not getting that. It would be in every year's budget.
Compounding over year, because you have that increase of the 3% plus the additional
More,
new
it's
bill.
greater and greater and greater.
You don't want to know what it would look like at 10 years. I mean, and there's two ways of looking at this, and to be respectful to the legislators who passed this, it'd be like, look at the millions of dollars of tax relief I provided that would otherwise be taxed. The other way of looking at it is, how do you keep 1.28 officers per thousand when you're having to feed the whole party and let all these people in at 75 cents on the dollar? So at some point, that compounds to where you have to pull a rabbit out of your hat at some point.
Fair.
And this matches up with the sheet I put together for you about a month ago, where I showed you the growth in the revenues and the expenses as we go out in between 2027 and 2030. We're quickly going to get to a point where we're short, where our expenses are going faster to our revenue by the tune of $2.5–3 million a year.
So I was just mentioning that, so I'm not sure what else you have to present. We have 20 minutes, so let's keep going on the presentation. And then for council, we're going to save our questions. And we'll finish the presentation and then we'll have discussion and questions. Is that okay? I don't know how much presentation we have left.
I'm
Okay.
done.
And let me go, mine dovetails right into what they've got. Because I
Okay.
take the impact and say, what does that mean now as you approve new subdivisions? What does that do? How much, well, in other words, does growth pay for growth? That's what I want to address right now.
And as you're pulling it up, if you could send these documents, they will need to be part of the record for the minutes, but then also if we could have a copy to the council, if we could all receive a copy of these documents, this is really helpful.
And as I complete the model.
Thank you.
I'll provide that to you as well.
Thank you. Thank you.
I think this model is a really good model moving forward. I mean, it does show the impacts of 389 and the constraints that the city and the county are currently under and not being able to fund for the growth that's happening in our area. But we continue to support the growth that is happening. So.
Exactly. So this is the file collaborative between Steve and I. Where Steve gave me the basic data on these first two sections. This is just our net value of the city from 2022, 23, 24, and projected here. It's interesting to note $17 billion of value in the next tax year. Please note this is the 2025 tax year or the 2026 budget year. So there's a year difference between the two of them. And this is the same budget values we've taken, and this is the growth we've taken per year, 6.21% in 24's budget, 8.47. It's important to note that the cap at 8%, we were able to exceed that because of the foregone use, but normally there's an 8% cap, and we're projecting here, if we continue to go the way we have been, 7.34% going up into the next 3 years. But down here, this is the section that I want to get to, the next two sections. Based on this, Steve's helped create a little estimate saying, if we had a subdivision, say 350 homes, and anything inside this yellow parameter I can change the variables on, and let's say we assume that out of those 350 homes, there's a population of 3. You could say 4, you could say 5, whatever that population basis is. But if it's 3, then the estimated population increase for that subdivision is 1,050 people. And the improvement value, this is net of land, is $300,000. then your total new construction value would be $105 million. Take away the 10% is $90 million, or is $94 million. What's not in here that they showed this morning is that land use bill would actually make this a little less than what we're showing. And there's the estimated preliminary levy rate. So out of this subdivision, you would earn property taxes of around $246,000.
Doug, I apologize for stopping you. Can you change that number to 75%? Because we do know, based off of what they've told us, 389 plus 673 only allows us on the high end 75%. Is that a quick change, or would that be a
I'd
significant?
like to work through it a little more. I mean, it's easy to go 75% of this, but I don't know if that's the correct valuation. If I change that,
Yeah, and we'll refine the chart real quick, because I think the question that you asked, Sebastian, on that prior chart, not to go backwards, we'll clarify and get the documents over, is that chart below is more a land use gap. So that was the 3 mil, and then the 5 mil total was fully loaded. So what we're trying to do is, and we'll try to refine that, is 389 plus, and it's related to your question.
Thank you.
yeah.
Can we further refine what those combined effects are and calculate it so that you have good data to know
Right.
exactly what?
We will.
Yeah.
You'll get the idea here. So that's $246,000 at the high side. It will come down as we refine it. Now let's look at just the cost of growth for public safety. What does that mean in public safety? So if we've got right now a PAM ratio of 1.35 officers per 1,000 population, and the police would like to have a sworn to support ratio of 1 new support staff to every 2 new officers, and you factor that in down here, you'd have 1.42 new officers for this 1,050 population. You'd have 0.71 support staff, and you'd have a half a vehicle, give or take, in that area. Now, when we roll this over to cost, the average labor wage impact for a sworn officer new one is $120,000, fully loaded with benefits. So 1.42 times 120 is 170,000. The admin staff at about 95,000 fully loaded would be $67,000. One-time equipment would be $28,000, so $265,000 for operational costs. Vehicles, $70,000, and vehicles will more or less be paid for by impact fees, which is kind of coming out of a slightly different bucket. But the total growth cost here is $336,000 compared to bringing in $246,000, and as we've discussed, that $246,000 will go down. Keep in mind one other fact. This cost number is going to continue to increase as inflation impacts us. This number is going to continue to decrease as the levy rate comes down, the valuations go up. The gap will grow every year on this. This is not a static value.
If I could just real quickly say, this is police only.
This, police only.
The internal services that is property tax driven, at some point, it's not a 2-to-1 ratio at all. But there is IT, finance, HR, there is the support. When you grow your employee base, there's an added cost that is not represented here that is property tax
Exactly.
funded.
This is a very limited version of what the impact is. So in the city, we like to say growth pays for growth. With the introduction of House Bill 389 and the subsequent land use bill, growth does not pay for growth. It doesn't even come close to it. So if we take less than the 3%, honestly, from a finance perspective, we are bearing, I could do it for 26, but when you get to by 30, we'll be buried. You'll be looking at cutting services.
Mayor, so I'm trying to come at this from multiple angles.
And let me ask a question. Doug, is this pretty much your presentation to where we can step into discussion and questions?
Go ahead.
Okay, Councilman Griffin and then Councilman Haverfield.
So I am reducing the vehicle side of it because that comes out of impact fee. The difference per.
Well, yes, it does.
So
Yes,
$20,000 is what we're.
The initial does, but that car only lasts for 8 years. Then we have to buy another one. Eventually, I have to replace that vehicle.
It's a cost to the city.
So it is, but it isn't.
This information is fantastic, and I preface this, that's the keystone of everything else that I'm about to say. This is fantastic. I appreciate it greatly. I will be sharing it if I'm allowed to, because I think it's important for people to know. So I come at this at a fork in the road. This is good information. We're about to go into budget setting. It gives me more information to decide the direction considering foregone or not. My ultimate, foregone will run out at some point. So my issue is, number one, I hope, if we can, Mayor, I would like to have our legislators invited next time this presentation is presented, whether it be at the county level or if you're able to do a statewide webinar. This has to be put out there because they don't understand that there's an impact. I've called every one of our legislators since this issue got brought up saying, and I'll put this, I'm going to say the M word into the microphone, so I apologize. I'm frankly considering putting out a moratorium to feel the pinch to have change be made legislatively. And you could say, well, that's an economic devastation. It impacts jobs. It impacts what we're able to bring in. Limited. I just think we can talk about how bad this situation is, and we can say, man, this really sucks. And then we go home and we eat dinner and then we forget about it, and then it gets brought up in the next budget meeting and we talk about how bad it is and this really sucks. There has to be something that we engage on, council, planning and zoning, county level, to say something has to be done and changed because we have the data now. Now it's time to present it and say there needs to be a legislative change, and that's where I get worked up is we didn't have this before, but there has to be action hereafter to make a change.
So thank you for that comment. I'm sure we don't disagree on that. Because we only have 10 minutes, let's keep it to questions that you can answer, and then let's not share any documents until you guys get done putting them together.
Exactly.
And then when you do, we'll go from there. But we have two people. We have Councilman Haverfield, and then we need to address Councilman Rodriguez's question, and then we'll come to Councilman Bills. And let's try to keep it to questions at this time, and then we'll discuss action plans after that. But let's keep it to questions. So Councilman Haverfield.
Simple question. Canyon County, House Bill 389 and 673, did it have the same impact in county property that we're seeing within the city limits?
It's having the same impact for 64 tax.
So there's no benefit either way as far as for property ownership, inside or outside. The only thing that's different is we can control what our property tax increases are. And as an example, last year, as you mentioned, we had a 4% to the base and a 3% one time. So that 4% was a 4%.
1%.
1% along with the 3. So that's 4% that was added to the base.
No.
Yes.
For 1 year. 3% was only 1 year.
3%.
3% of the other 3%.
Right.
As opposed to the foregone 3%.
Foregone 3%. Oh, I'm sorry. I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
Yes, I see what you're saying.
For the property owner, they saw a 4% tax increase that's going to be ongoing and a 3% one time. That's what we did last year. Going forward, again, it's a decision on what we're talking about here, but what I understand with House Bill, with the reduction that we're seeing supposedly coming to the property owners, we're basically filling that volume back up with added tax increases. So there's not going to be a benefit to the property owner. They're going to see the same amount of tax or more, which is a point you made earlier in the presentation. Is that correct?
We're going to need to run that analysis, which we don't have here today, but Doug, I'm going to ask you to do it. Steve, it's going to mean you're going to help him. We're going to need to do that analysis, which is a different analysis that we have before us. And so before we state that, we need to make sure it's accurate. So if we could run that analysis, that would be beneficial.
There's a component there with the 4% increase, right? You didn't increase fully for the new construction. Remember, we can only use 90%.
Sure, but that's a different item than just the property tax increase that we did vote on. 3%, which were allowed by state statute. 1% added foregone, ongoing, which was allowed, and then 3% that was a one-time only for capital things. So that's what I think is important for the property, our taxpayers to know. As we move forward, we're going to be limited as far as with what we're going to be receiving back from the state. So how do we fill that void and still provide the service? Do we cut? I don't like the word moratorium. I think controlled growth is important. So it's just, again, there's more information that needs to be provided before we have a full analysis of what our path might be.
From a long-term perspective, and this is just math, I'm not saying it's the right thing to do, from a long-term perspective, if you were to pull the 1% and not use the capital 3% of foregone, the 1% stays in our base. And it, to a very small degree, offsets some of the impact of 389, but it does shift the burden a little bit, because you're taking new construction and not charging fully for it, and then you're taking that 1% and you're shifting on to the existing tax base. So it depends on how the analysis that Steve and I put together on how much 389 saves the individual home versus how much we're adding back on the 1%. But if you put the 1% in, that stays with us. That helps. It's like putting a Band-Aid on an artery. It does help a little bit, but not.
Thank you for those. We've only got 7 minutes, and so we need to get to Victor's question. How does the $400,000 cut at the state impact local government? I think that was his question. I'm sorry, million, yeah.
So,
sorry.
You're right, just very quick wrap on that last part is the new construction formula, we're losing on average over $1 million because of the way the formula changed. So 1%'s what, a couple $100,000?
1%'s 400,000.
400,000, so it's not even
us.
recapturing what's lost with the formula change. So if you do that, what's weird is you're increasing the percent, but it's still a net tax decrease because the total value is still being calculated in the denominator that is driving down the levy rate. And that's maybe a deeper dive follow-up session because that value is captured, but you're not allowed to grab the increment to tax it. So the net effect, because of the tax base is still growing and you're deducting and then you're refilling, it's still a net. It's the equivalent of $3, $4, $5 million less than if Nampa kept doing what it was doing under the old formula. So it is a little complicated, and that would be a follow-up.
We're transferring the burden. Instead of new construction funding, the new people coming in of growth, their taxes funding it, we're transferring the burden to the existing taxpayers because we're having to make up for it in using our foregone.
Exactly.
And then we're going back in level of service. But
So
let's go
Rodriguez's
to
question.
Yeah, so
On
Rodriguez
legislation.
yes.
So, Councilman Rodriguez, that was recent legislation where the legislature is appropriating, and we've been good about in the tax bill trying to show, and by the way, you could go to Canyon County and go to Data Hub and look at 5 years worth of your tax returns, not tax returns, your property tax bill, and we make a distinction between your gross bill. I don't mean gross in an adjectival sense. Just some people think it's gross, yes, property taxes, but the gross, you're fully loaded, and then what the credit value is. And so to Councilman Rodriguez's credit, they did appropriate more money this legislative session, but I've spoken to the speaker, and there's no guarantee that they're going to have the financial capacity in the coming years to throw money towards a credit. In fact, the state, and I've shared this with Doug, it has not had a good quarter in their finances. They've had 3 months of decline, and they're missing their projections. So I don't think the state's going to be in a position based on the current trajectory to add more money as a credit. So I know that they've said, you better get your budgets in order because people are going to see a rebound. That rebound is going to be the loss of that credit, likely maybe the following year. I can't speak. They don't have a crystal ball, but if they don't have the money to continue to appropriate the credit, basically what the state's doing is they're helping pay down part of your property taxes with that credit. And if the state doesn't have the money to do that, then that credit goes away and the net tax bill will go back up to reflect more of that gross amount, if that makes sense.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, Councilman Bills had the next question, and then we'll come back, and then you have a question. Okay, and then we have 3 minutes.
From a standpoint, everybody is still getting hit with the same mill levy. Is that correct? New and
Well, that's kind of complex.
That's a follow-up.
Yeah.
There's the hypothetical levy rate that was a result of 389 that says by the time you bring on the new construction, so even if you got the certificate of occupancy today, it's based on the existing levy rate. That's the most equitable thing because that's what everybody else is paying. But by the time it comes onto the new construction roll, you're not bringing in the increment based on what the levy rate was at the time when the house was built. You're supposed to then predict what your new levy rate will be by taking the increased valuation and then apply it retroactively to the value at the time it was. So that, I'm sorry, I don't mean to sound complicated, but the legislation is complicated. So, but the levy rate, the hypothetical levy rate is applied to, that's another contributing factor that reduces it. So we're just majoring on the two major things, like the 10% reduction and the land value change, but there's these other contributing factors that's driving down the levy rate, but while limiting your corresponding budget increase.
Okay, so what I'm trying to understand is, party who moved into a new home a year ago, and somebody who's been there 30 years, is there physically a different mill levy on those
No.
tax bills? It's the same mill levy. That's across the board.
Across the board.
But because of the valuation and what's factored in, proportionately, they're paying less.
But when we calculate what we receive, we've got like 3 different mill rates we have to use. One of them estimated, and so it's like, from my perspective, it's mud.
Well, they're not, the new construction is not paying based on their new construction value. They're paying taxes based on a reduced value because we're not able to collect based on the actual value of that property. Is that a correct statement? Or is that an incorrect statement?
I think it's correct, but
There's nuances to it.
With Councilman Bill's question, I think when you're looking at a budgetary capacity, the mill rate means nothing. It has nothing to do with your budget.
Right.
The mill rate is what is applied to each individual property throughout the county, right? And the mill rate is affected by the valuation within the district. There's a market value adjustment, right? So a house, you've done nothing with the house, it's $400,000. The next year it's $450,000 because that's what the market is willing to pay for that. Well, that adjustment creates a decrease in the levy rate, right? So that's why levy rates don't have anything to do with budget. It has everything to do with what the market value adjustment is.
Right, I understand that. And so what I'm trying to ascertain is, our arbitrary assessor or the assessor's office being arbitrary in valuations, it's one value to an existing property and keeps raising because of new construction. But then we're saying new construction is only coming in and being charged 80%. So what I'm trying to look at is, it feels like because the assessed value of existing property is going up based on new construction, and new construction is being given a 20% cut.
10%.
10%.
Of what's left after, not including the land value change.
Right.
Yeah, so therefore, it feels like those who have been in the city for greater than 5 years prior to 389 are continuing to carry from a physical writing of the check proportionately more than those who have come in the last 5 years.
Well, I would say everyone is experiencing the relief. So I think the honest policy discussion is, if you think of it as 100 people paying $10 to a dinner party, and then you let the next 100 people in at $8, and you were to recharge it out, everyone would get charged $9 now. So the people who were paying 10, but there's less food now, right, to feed. So I think that's the honest illustration of trying to capture this, is that the existing people are not shouldering the burden to the benefit of the newcomers, because you recalculate the levy rate after you determine what the total value is.
And you take that levy rate and apply it to all the valuations.
I understand, but what I'm getting at is the new construction cost, the new construction pricing is driving the value of the existing homes. The assessor's office is raising the values. So those people are arbitrarily coming up in value and proportionately paying more when we then take off this 10% of new construction. I mean, I'm seeing a real backhanded move out of 389.
Thank you for that comment. So we're at 9, but Councilwoman Jangula has a question, and then after that, we may, depending on the availability of people, we'll maybe continue the discussion.
I'm just wondering if there's any projections as to the changes to the urban renewal bill that was just done, what that's going to do for the cities.
So the new urban renewal bill, I think the existing, you're grandfathered with the existing debt, repayment schedule. So fire districts and whatnot won't be able to exempt out of existing. I think it only applies moving forward. The other component is, I think it actually allows you to enlarge your urban renewal district under qualifying, and that was really to accommodate the Chobani. I mean, the bill was really crafted in a large degree to accommodate what was going on with Chobani. Very briefly, what's to add to the further confusion is the increment that doesn't get added on the land value, it does get included in urban renewal districts, which is another wrinkle to the whole mix. So
Explain that further.
so when there's a land value change, let's say ag goes to industrial, the total increased value, land value and building all gets, I don't know if we like the word tax in the urban renewal.
Yeah.
It all gets multiplied by the existing levy rate, calculated outside of that, and it rolls into the increment. So the land value increase, or any market increase, gets treated as an increment applied by the levy rate for urban renewal purposes. But that's another wrinkle in how some of the complexity that exists with the land value change. They're not allowing you as the city, the primary provider of services, to take that value as an increment, but urban renewal gets that increment. But yeah, the recent legislation, I think Nampa's urban renewal, URD, just continues as is. There's legal obligations.
Correct, except that there is a component in that legislation, that the statewide, where the city council can terminate a urban renewal district. And the language that is allowed in, if there's existing debt, under the fire district, they exempted out that and clarified it. Under the city, they did not. So there is a very scary component of that language that we can talk about outside of this, and that's the leverage the state could put on the city to terminate an urban renewal district, even if it does have debt, which you can't do. But the legislation did not clarify that language, and that's really unfortunate because it should have clarified it. And it gives the state the opportunity to leverage whatever against a city based on urban renewal, and they don't like urban renewal.
So as quick as I can be with them, I know we're over, but I think it's important. I just think solutions. What are we going to do from here on out? Have we maximized what we can collect on the impact fees for new builds?
There's an impact fee meeting, I think, this week. I can't remember if it's tomorrow. There's a lot of discussion, but we've worked with the Snake River Building Contractors Association and overall.
I know that, impact fees it's not popular.
Not the answer.
It's not the answer, but we need some sort of answer. And my answer, and this is where I'm getting in.
But it doesn't help. All it does is that it does help. It's for capital and it's for growth only. It doesn't resolve this issue.
So that's my follow-up question. Can we collect as a city a one-time welcome to Nampa fee that drops in the bucket? Because impact fees were then capped and controlled on what we can spend on.
STAR is doing that, but this is a different discussion that is going to take way longer than we have. So let's come back and have this discussion.
And I just look at this because we have to think in the realities of our budgetary situation. Either we need to start collecting more, we need to stop approving, or we need to lobby, and maybe it can be a combination of all three. We're just talking about 20,000 deficit for every new, is it home or individual?
Well,
We're talking about
this is just a housing, well, this is only an example. This is not.
Example, right.
This isn't, this is.
350 homes as a scale on your.
Right, but this doesn't take in new construction. It doesn't take in commercial, anything else. So this cannot be used as a number.
Okay.
We're going to have to look at it a little differently because Doug was just doing a quick example.
So I will get to the point of why I bring up these questions and for a latter conversation, but I don't want to blindside staff or the development community or anybody else. We need to either collect more, and that burden will ultimately get passed on to the individual purchasing the house. It's going to drive up home costs. I think low-income housing is out the window unless there's something else that changes, because we need to pass these dollars on to the new purchaser, or we need to stop approving growth.
Okay. So there's a lot of discussion that needs to take place.
Just keep in mind one thing. Costs will go up even without growth, right? So if you put the nail in the coffin on new growth, you're hurting ourselves even more than if you move forward with the growth.
Even more if we are adding additional police officers or staff to accommodate the new growth? Is it as bad or more bad?
This is a static valuation. We can go into this later. This is static. The cost of inflation is not added in here, and we're going to have to bear that no matter what happens. You can shut off growth today, my costs are going to go up tomorrow.
An example of that is last year we had $1.2 million. A 3% increase for the city is just over $1.2 million. Last year we had approximately $1.2 million in increases that we had no control over, that were not wages or anything.
Yep.
That was Percy, it was
Percy,
healthcare, and insurance. ICREMP insurance. Just that alone increased our budget to the full 3%. So that's why last year we did a 5% operational cut. This year we're keeping it at 0. I'll just say that Nampa is not alone. Every city in the Treasure Valley is facing the same thing. The mayors of the Treasure Valley are having these discussions about what we do collectively, because unless it's collective across the entire Treasure Valley, Nampa alone could do something and it could hurt us, it couldn't, maybe, we need to all take this on together, so those discussions are taking place.
And I think STAR has given us a great example that we can still collect our one-time welcome to Nampa fee, and there's still going to be approving projects, and people are still going to be moving to these cities. I think we just have to recoup as much as we can, and maybe that's selfish. I'm already here. I get it. I get the perception from it affects everyone in the economy, the builders, the contractors, the suppliers. It doesn't help us. However, we can't continue on this course, so there has to be, in my mind, do we collect more? Do we stop growing? I'm not leaning one way or the other, but something's got to be different.
And I will say, we have been discussing this for years. This is not new. Sure. It's just that we have a legislature that isn't responsive. We're never going to go back and fix the problem we're in, and it's going to be very difficult in the coming years. That's why Doug has been very careful with our budgeting, and it's a statewide issue that we need to resolve together. But with that, I would stand for a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Thank you. Thank you, guys.
That was quick.
Thank you so much for coming out.
Yeah,
You added some valuation to that, so we'll have to get together and return this based on the land use, and I'll get my ducks in a row.
And there's